All right, welcome to episode 4 of Pops and Drops.
What up?
And last week we started talking about economic systems. We covered healthcare. We talked about
College?
college, higher education. And we're starting to talk about homelessness. And so I thought we would continue this week and get a little more in-depth into why we think people are homeless in the United States.
There's something different about you. I'm feeling different now that I found you. There's something different about you. Yeah, I'm feeling different now that I found you.
And I must admit, this is a hard one. I mean, there's obviously a trade-off between personal liberty, giving people. I mean, if you make homes available to people, there's still going to be people who opt out, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't expect to get everyone off the streets, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can, but a lot of the people that are on the streets are on the streets because a large majority of the mental institutions were closed down.
Okay, so one of your solutions is to institutionalize people.
I mean, if there is to just give them, give them help. Yeah. I mean, I don't. I mean, isn't that the case? Isn't there a large portion of the homeless people are homeless because they shut down all the institutions?
I don't know. I know a lot of the issue is drug related, right? Are there a lot of people that are on the streets because they're addicted to drugs or alcohol?
Well, there's probably a portion, but that might not be why they were on the streets. That might be a result of them being on the streets
Okay.
instead of the other way around.
Okay.
You know, someone could have lost their job and then it just became a downward spiral.
Okay.
You know, or they could have been mentally ill, and a lot of mentally ill people cope with that through drugs and alcohol.
Okay. Well, I know that the problem is certainly increasing, right? There's a lot of discussion in California about the homeless populations in San Francisco and Los Angeles.
That's due to the rental rates being so high.
Okay. So people are out on the streets because it's so expensive to
Because they
live there.
literally can't afford to. I mean, when in the 7 years that I lived in LA, I had 3 friends that all started living in their cars because they couldn't afford the rent.
Okay.
One was an ex-military vet who moved to California, and 6 months in couldn't get a decent job and wound up living in his car. Another friend of mine had a job, and then I think he ate an edible while working and just walked out of his job, so he got fired, and then he wound up living in his car. And the third person, their support system, I think, collapsed. I think their parents passed, or the person who was helping them financially wasn't able to anymore. I think because they passed away, and they wound up living in their car too. I mean, if you go down, you know, if you're in LA, there everyone. I mean, Venice Beach is just, you know, that's where a large majority of homeless people live.
So do you feel like people are trapped there and couldn't go back to, Iowa or wherever they came from? Or is it they're choosing to stay there?
I think to them it's a temporary solution that turns permanent.
Okay.
I think it's okay. I can stay in my car for a couple months while I try to get, my life back in order, and then a couple months turns into years. And
Interesting.
But one of my friend did. The military guy, I don't know what happened to him. I think he wound up going home, and my other friend, who just walked out of his job because he was high, he wound up moving back home. So
Okay.
Two that I know of actually left LA.
So maybe to tackle the issue, we need to get specific and not think of homelessness as a monolith, but the divide up the population. So there's people that are able to return home if they're in a particular spot because they went there for work or for whatever and things didn't work out, but they have a car, for instance.
Yeah.
They could return to somewhere else where they might still have support. That's probably the easiest part of that population to
But
take care of.
you also have to think about how, I mean, like in Los Angeles, there is a ton of RVs all over the place of people, of families who just can't afford rent and get a PO box and a gym membership and live in an RV
And have jobs
and
and
have
work
jobs.
there.
Yeah, that's why they have the PO box and the gym membership. I mean, I there's a ton of people that do that.
So that's not necessarily homeless. That's just a alternative housing solution.
Yeah, but is an RV really different than a tent? I mean, I guess it is, but you know, that's just another step down versus a step up.
So we can also think of homelessness as a spectrum. So from the person sleeping in a doorway under newspaper, all the way up to someone living in an RV. As a
Yeah,
spectrum, there's people in tents, there's people in cardboard boxes, whatever.
yeah,
Okay, so there's different situations, circumstances that people have to deal with the way they're living. Just a spectrum of physical infrastructure, personal infrastructure. I don't know what to call it. But then there is population. We could also divide the population up into people based on their reason for being homeless. We talked about mental illness. We talked about drug addiction. The solutions for those two things, there would be some overlap, but those are two specific things that would have to be dealt with. And then the people that are not mentally ill or addicted to drugs just aren't making enough money to pay for traditional housing in the place where they are.
yeah. And
Because
especially in big cities, rent is astronomical everywhere.
so so let's tackle the easy ones first, right?
Okay.
The reason that rents are high is because there's more people who want to rent someplace than there are places to rent. Simple supply and demand, right?
To a certain degree, to a certain extent,
Well, how would it not be that?
rent control.
Well, all that. So let's talk about rent control then. So if you've got 1,000 landlords
Yep.
and you impose rent control on 200 of them,
Uh huh.
okay, so these 200 places by government edict can charge no more than X dollars.
Well, rent control is that they can't raise the rent every year by a certain percentage. That's what rent control is.
Okay, so it's
So,
not.
and that's the problem, is that what happens is that someone is in an apartment and they move out of that apartment. The property manager or the landlord calls and does research on the rent everywhere, and the second one building starts raising the rent, all of them do. So if there is five apartment buildings in a row, apartment building one evicted somebody, went in rehab that apartment completely, and then raised the rent by $500. Then the apartment building two, they call apartment building one, say, hey, I just want to know what your average rent is, and that one apartment has been raised by $1,000, and apartment building two is like, oh, okay, well if they're charging $1,000 extra, I can charge $1,000 extra because that's where they are, and rent control prevents that.
Right. But at some point, if you raise the rent to a point where there was nobody to take that rent, and they said, not going to pay it. I'm going to live in an RV instead, and that apartment went unrented, then the apartment owner would lower the rent to get somebody in there, right? Occupancy is the issue.
Not once it's already established. That's the problem.
But people aren't
Landlords
going
don't lower rent.
But
They only raise rent.
They only raise rent to the point where there's still people willing to pay it.
There will always be people willing to pay it.
No, there isn't.
Yes,
there's some point at
because
which
the population is growing. There will always be, and there's always an influx of new people coming in. And what happens is people come in and they pay that for a year, and then the landlord raises the rent on everybody, and then they can't pay it the next year, so those people have to move to a shittier part of town.
Okay.
And then the new people come in and take that one, and then they get raised, and then they got to move to a shittier part of town too. That's how it works. That's the system.
Well, the only way that system
is prevented is by rent control.
No, the way that system is prevented is by people building more apartments.
You're assuming that land is that there's endless amount of land and zoning when you can't do that. You can't just build new apartments, especially with zoning.
Okay, so the government intervention called zoning is what keeps entrepreneurs from building more housing to accommodate the demand for housing.
Yes, but builders aren't everybody is trying to make as much money as possible and screw everybody over as much as they possibly can. That's the problem.
Well, I don't know why you always equate screw everybody over with make as much money as you can. Why couldn't it just be everybody is trying to make as much money as they can, period? That's
because inherently you can't make as much money as you can unless you screw people over.
Unless
you cut your bottom line, unless you use crappy contractors and you use shitty material in order to build an apartment so that your cost is low. And so when people come in, it may look nice, but the appliances are all crappy. It's that's making the most money would be undercutting everybody.
Only in the short term. So
everyone's thinking short term. That's the problem.
Well,
because in order to make that's what they do.
If you build a place that has what you said, crappy appliances or whatever, somebody signs a 6-month lease and discovers that they have crappy appliances, they'll move out.
Yeah, and then somebody else will move right in. And when that other person moves in, they can raise the rent.
Well,
because that's how they raise rents.
Right, but the people that are moving into those apartments are theoretically not moving into them sight unseen.
Yes.
Okay.
That's true.
So
you slap a new paint job on it. That's the thing. The landlords don't care. They don't want people in there for the long term. They want them in there for a year or 2 years so that they can move those people out and they can raise the rent and they can make more money. But that's why rent control is important.
But that situation would only be true as long as there were people to move in at the higher rents.
Yes, and there always will be. In LA or in every major city, there's influxes of there's people chomping at the bit.
That's not necessarily true. Like
in LA it is, and in San Francisco it is, and in New York it is, and in Atlanta it is.
What happened in New York after the riots? What happened in New York? Rents decreased. Rents fell. Some people said rents fell by 30%.
Well, that's a very unique situation.
Well, but it illustrates the issue. It's a supply and demand issue. When demand falls because people want to move out of the city because of riots, that means the people who are renting apartments have to lower the rent to the point where somebody will take the rent, will take the price.
Yes, but that is not if the riots and COVID wasn't happening, then it would have continued.
Okay.
Then the messed up system would have continued and probably will continue in the majority of the country.
I don't so
You said what's the matter with people wanting to make the most money? That's what landlords do. They want to make the most money and
right.
they want to they want to get people in and out.
Well,
It's
they
just like a restaurant. They want people in and out.
but in a broader economic system, when you consider not just a single building or a single landlord, they're operating within a system that has supply and demand constraints. If the supply was allowed to increase, if there wasn't any zoning and entrepreneurs could build more buildings and or apartment buildings or convert more commercial real estate into condos or do whatever they needed to do, if they aren't prevented by zoning and government regulation from doing that, and it would make them a profit if this, if renting apartments and condos is profitable,
And it
people
would still be profitable with
people
rent
will step
control.
up to do it. As long as there's money to be made, people will do that thing. So
And it would
that's the
still be
issue.
profitable with rent control.
But
Rent control
okay,
says you cannot raise the rent by more than 1 or 2% every year.
right.
That's what rent control
In a
is.
system where the barrier to entry is there, meaning the government says, no, you can't build more apartments. No, you can't convert commercial real estate into residential real estate by government edict. So now the government says the supply of housing is constrained. This is the most housing we're going to have in this area. This is it. Okay.
Uh huh.
And
Do you
in
know
that
why
but
Do you know why they have zoning?
in that situation, rent control makes sense because in that situation, people are going, to try and continue to raise the rent as the demand increases. There's no way to meet the demand. And so your choice there, it's very simple. You continue to raise the rent until the only people renting those apartments are the ones who can afford it, and everybody else ends up moving away or
And that's
homeless.
Manhattan and Beverly Hills.
Manhattan has rent control. So that's what I'm saying. If there is no rent control
Uh huh.
and you have a limited and you have a constrained supply of housing,
Yeah.
then the rents will increase to the point where everybody who's renting an apartment are only those people who can afford the increased rent. So you're narrowing the population of the people who live in that area to those who make enough money to pay that rent,
Yes.
right? And everybody else ends up moving away or moving onto the street. Simple, right?
Yes.
Simple system. You put rent control in.
Uh huh.
Now, you if you specify some percentage of the
Usually 1 or 2%.
available housing stock.
Yeah. I think sometimes it can go up. I think max is like 4 or 5%. But
Okay, so 4 or 5% of the apartments are rent control.
no, 4 or 5% is the increase that you can
Well,
charge within rent control for the neck for if someone moves out and a new person moves
okay,
in.
so
That's what
that's
rent control is.
just the control on the increase, but the proportion of the housing stock that's subject to rent control is never 100%. It's always some subset.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think it's anywhere from 50 to 80%.
There's no place where 80% of the apartments in a city are rent controlled.
No, but within a building.
Okay, but I'm talking about the total housing stock. We're talking about the entire economic system, right?
Yeah. Then rent that's only like 5%.
Okay, so 5% of the available housing is rent
And
controlled.
that's the problem.
Okay, well, here's my point. You're essentially the same dynamic still applies. The rent still increases on the other 95% of the housing. And so now you've essentially got a lottery where 5% of the
That's
population
what's currently
luck
going
out.
on.
Yeah.
And that's what's the problem.
Well, so your solution is what? To raise the rent control to 90% of the buildings and what? Tell me.
Yes, I think that every new building that is built and every apartment building or even houses should be under rent control. You cannot raise the rent by more than 5%, and it's each year, too, or each new tenant. That's what rent control is. So you have a building. Say you built a brand new apartment building, and because of the area and where you're at, you charge $1,000, right? A rent per unit. The next year, you can only charge $1,050. The next year, it's 1,100. That's with rent control.
Right.
But what's going on is you're building a brand new building. You're charging $1,000 for every unit, and then the second somebody moves out, you raise the rent to $1,250, and then 1,500, and then 2,000, and then within 5 years, all the apartments within that building are like $4,000 a month versus $1,000. That's what's currently going on.
Right. And in that situation,
And a lot of those people are homeless or had to move because of that.
and the people who aren't homeless are the ones who could pay $4,000 a month rent.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's corrupt. That's corruption.
How is that corrupt?
Because it's screwing over everybody.
It's not.
It's saying that this $1,000 apartment is $4,000 now because I'm an asshole and I want to make more money.
No, it's a $4,000 a month apartment because there's somebody who'll pay $4,000 a month to live there. That's what makes it a $4,000 a month apartment.
And all the people who couldn't are homeless.
Right.
Or had to move.
The reason that building got built in the first place is because the person investing capital to construct that building knew that they would have the opportunity to charge whatever the market rate for housing was. If there was, when they were considering building this building, there was this constraint on the amount of money they could ever make by rent control. Say, if you're going to build this new apartment building, the most you'll ever be able to make out of it is an incremental 5% per year, right?
Each year, though. Each year.
Sure. But so now what you're saying is the rate of return on this investment is going to be 5% increase in rent minus whatever your increasing costs are.
Yeah.
You can raise the rent 5%. If you have to pay your manager 3% more per year, if the materials to service those apartments go up 3 to 5 to 10%, you don't even know what your increased costs are going to be if paint for whatever reason goes up, right? Plumbing, plumbers, whatever you, groundskeepers, whatever you have to pay to maintain that building. If they go up more than 5% per year, then you're just losing. You're just out of luck, right? Because you can only increase your revenue side by 5% per year because of rent increases. Okay, so that's the potential investment that you're looking at when you're deciding whether or not to take your $1 million and go build a new building. On the other hand, you could take that $1 million and you could just put it in the stock market, and you'd be very likely to make 10% per year. Right? So you have a choice for your own personal wealth to invest. Do I take $1 million and do I put it in the stock market and make 10? Or do I build this building and make 5?
It's long-term versus short-term, and that's what we said. That's the problem, is everyone is thinking short-term.
No, the long-term returns on the stock market are about 10%.
Okay.
Over, if you keep your money invested in the stock market for 30 years, you'll average 10%, 9 to 10% per year.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's the bar. When you are creating an investment opportunity for something, you have to have at least a good chance that you're going to make more than 10% return on that money, or your potential investors that you're trying to gather together to raise the money to do this project, they're going to just leave their money in the stock market. Okay? So you have to be able to return more than 10% per year, or you won't get any money to do your project. Because
everyone's an asshole.
Because there's a difference between charity. I mean, people can do charity.
It's not charity. You'd still be making money. You just wouldn't be making as much money.
But in essence, that's charity. You're going to say, if I'm going to choose to make 5% instead of 10, I'm deciding to give away 5%. I'm
5% instead of 10, but you're housing hundreds of people.
Again, charity. That's fine. I mean, people should do charity, but just know that that's what that is.
But you're still making
There's
money.
No
so it's not charity. You're still making a ton of money. You're just not making as much money. And that's the problem that everyone has, is that they will rather cut corners and screw people over to make 1% more than what they would have done if they had been a good person.
Right. But if you want to do a project that makes less money for you than the money you could otherwise make simply by putting your money in the stock market, that's doing charity. That's sacrificing your own potential revenue and wealth to benefit somebody else. That's charity.
It's not sacrificing your own
It is-
wealth because you'd still be making money.
But you are sacrificing some
You're
percentage.
you're
sacrificing if your investment in this apartment complex is going to make you a 5% return because of rent control, and you know that you can make 10% a year in the stock market, you are giving up 5% of the money that you could be making to do this project. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that is charity. That is
If you're
charity.
making money, it's not charity. You need to find another word for that.
The 5% that you are sacrificing that you would otherwise make by moving that money into the stock market, that 5% is charity.
Because you're greedy.
No, if you're not greedy, if you're deciding to do the project that's only going to make you 5% instead of 10, that's the opposite of greedy. That's being charitable.
Yeah, I'm saying that if you chose a 10, it's because you're a greedy person and you don't want to house people and you just want to make as much money as you possibly can and you don't care about anybody else.
Okay.
And
Potentially.
That's the problem.
But you could, there's two issues. You could potentially put that money in the stock market and take 5% of your returns and give it to dolphins or save the whales or clean up the ocean or whatever you wanted to do with that 5%. Just because somebody decides not to build an apartment building with all the hassles that come along with that, instead of taking that 5% difference that they would be sacrificing if they did build the apartment building and doing some other charity work with it, that they're not necessarily a greedy bastard just because they decided not to build an apartment building.
If you were giving two options, and one option is 5%, but you can help out 100 people, and another option is 10%, but you're just helping out yourself, then if you're choosing the 10%, you're a greedy bastard.
What if you maybe there are people who do that, but then there's also people who take the 10% and then put that 5% difference into something that they believe in. They support the local public library, or they contribute to, relieving hunger in Africa.
Outside of this hypothetical situation
what I'm saying, this is the hypothetical situation. You're saying you should force people to be charitable.
I'm not saying you should force people to be charitable. I'm just saying what's the matter with people is that majority of them are greedy bastards, and they will try to cut everything, and they will raise rent as much as they possibly can. It's a machine, man. It's everyone views other people as.
Here's the issue: is you are assigning negative emotional and psychological characteristics to individuals who are simply behaving within a system that has economic incentives to maximize the return on their effort and investment. Just because somebody decides to do something that is efficient and makes sense economically does not make them a greedy bastard.
If you choose that over helping people, it does.
Okay, but you're taking away, you're going to assume somebody's a greedy bastard because they think that if they wanted to spend their money on endowing a university or contributing to UNICEF or whatever they wanted to do with their money, that, just because it wasn't invested in an apartment building.
This was the confines of the situation that you presented. You're saying they have two options. They can either build an apartment building. Their two options is choose to build a building in a rent-controlled environment where they know they'll only ever make 5%, or invest their money in something else. Yeah.
And what they do with the returns on that money is also their choice. Maybe they don't contribute to charity, or maybe they take the returns from their other investment and do something else with it. Create a new business that employs people. It's about liberty. It all comes down to liberty. Do people have the right to spend their money the way that they want to spend it?
Do landlords have the right to consistently raise rent and screw people out and make homeless people? Yes. That's what you're saying that they do. You think that everyone should be able to screw each other over if they want to.
I'm saying the source of screwing people over is the government constraints that keeps people from being able to build more housing.
No, it's not.
Why?
Because if they wanted to build more housing, if you wanted to build more housing, you could go out in the middle of the desert and build the town. It's not like you're saying that the reason why zoning exists is because you need to have services available for the people who live within that community. So you have to have commercial zones. You have to have residential zones. You want to get rid of zoning too. That's what you were saying.
Sure. Make the highest and best use of the land.
Okay, well the highest and best use of the land is to turn everything into a factory.
No, not necessarily. What do you mean? Factories have to have, I mean, unless they're totally automated
The highest
factories.
and best use of the that's why there's wasn't there like no zoning in Texas or in Houston, and that's why it was a smog capital of the world. That's why grandma couldn't go outside certain days because the air quality was so low because there wasn't zoning
Well, the air
and there
quality,
wasn't any regulation
the air
and they
quality,
didn't care about people.
no, no, the air quality in Houston was never as bad as the air quality in LA. I
Yeah,
mean,
LA wasn't good either. I'm
and
not.
LA has zoning and Houston doesn't. So experiment, that if that's an experiment, then zoning doesn't have anything to do
No,
with smog
well, that was because of the amount of cars in LA.
and the number of cars in Houston.
There
Yeah.
wasn't the oil factories that were all over the place.
No, no.
Okay.
I mean, the oil refineries, the closest ones were Pasadena, and that was essentially downwind from Houston. So the prevailing winds blew the oil refinery effluent over towards Port Arthur and Beaumont. So that moved everything east. But anyway, no. The smog in Houston was because of the number of cars. I mean, Houston is a very unique city because it has the ability to annex unincorporated areas within 5 miles of a major thoroughfare. So any place where you have a freeway or a state highway and there's unincorporated area within 5 miles of that thoroughfare, the city has the right to annex that and add it to the city. So over time, Houston has just grown and grown and grown. With the actual city limits of Houston, they've also grown around other cities. It's kind of like the blob. So West University, Bel Air, there's all these little towns that did incorporate before Houston got there, and Houston just kind of grew around them. So it's pretty interesting. But they don't have zoning. And what that means is that if there's a piece of land and somebody thinks the most money they can make with that land is to build a house, they build a house. If somebody thinks the most amount of money they can make with that land is to build a 7-Eleven, they build a 7-Eleven or a gas station or a church or whatever. And if, because of the dynamics, the ongoing economic dynamics of a neighborhood, if somebody has built a house and now they think they can make more money by tearing the house down and building a 7-Eleven, they'll tear the house down and build a 7-Eleven. So because of the economic freedom to make the highest and best use of the land, there's a lot of dynamism in the economy where things change. They don't change overnight, but they evolve over time. Some neighborhoods, decline, and as the housing stock goes down and less people want to live there, they start to switch over from residential to commercial or semi-industrial and vice versa. One of the constraints that Houston doesn't have because of the annexing laws is because the city can keep getting bigger and bigger, they essentially just grew the residential housing stock along the peripheral of the city and added
Everyone
more
in
and
the
more.
center would make it business.
Pardon?
That happened because of what you said. Because there was no zoning, so that they did have houses there, and how eventually the houses all got torn down, and they all became business parks.
Oh, in the middle, right. Well, but then there's another constraint, which is how far are people willing to drive to come into a commercial center to work? So the downtown area of Houston for a long time, was a commercial destination where people would drive into. But when the traffic started to get so bad that people didn't want to make that trade-off anymore, then people started building commercial and office space closer out in the peripheral, out to the suburbs. So, they have rings of commercial office buildings as well. So downtown is not the central business district in Houston. The business districts are distributed throughout the city. So there's office buildings in Greenway Plaza. There's office buildings all around the 610 loop that goes around town. There's office buildings up by the airport in the northern part of town. There's office buildings down towards Sugarland. Any place where there was a sufficient concentration of people where it would make sense to have an office building and have commercial space that people closer by could work at. Somebody built an office building instead of more houses, or somebody built an office building instead of a 7-Eleven or a factory or a warehouse. Whatever made sense for that piece of land, that's what people would build there because there wasn't any zoning. And as a result, traffic in Houston is bad, but it's nowhere near as bad as it would be otherwise if everybody had to try to get downtown. I mean, Houston is huge. It's like 68 miles across the town. But anyway, when you have constraints, government constraints on housing, because like here in Portland, they have the green zones and an urban growth boundary. So in Portland, basically, the way that they've dealt with the housing issue is if you are a homeowner, right, and you want to remodel your kitchen, you have to build a garage apartment. They don't issue building permits unless it contributes to increasing housing density.
Okay.
Okay. So essentially, you as a homeowner, you no longer have the liberty to do with your property what you want. The government has imposed their plan that says, we're not going to authorize you to do what you want to do to your house unless you also do this.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that's the trade-off. You think you're free in the United States to do what you want, and you would think on your own property that you bought that you'd be able to do what you want. But
You don't own it. None of the land in America is owned by America. It's owned by the individual.
What do you mean?
We have eminent domain. Isn't the United States based? Isn't eminent domain says that the United States, the government owns everything, owns all the land. They can come in and take you out if they want to. They can demolish your house if they need to build a freeway.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and even before that, this land does not belong to an individual.
Okay, so there's no personal property rights?
I don't know because we stole this land from the Native Americans.
Right. True. And we established a system where personal property rights could be assigned. People could deed property.
Yeah.
And what that did was create a system of incentives where people made investments, they improved the land, they put up houses, put up fences, grew crops. So the personal property rights that incentivized the people who moved here to invest their own time and money and effort into improving the land created the wealth that the United States now enjoys.
Yes.
Okay. So perhaps,
but you're saying that you don't think that the government should be able to tell you that you can't do say you, okay, let's do it this way. You think that you should be able to do whatever you want with your personal property.
As long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of others.
Okay.
I shouldn't be able to put up a factory on my farm that's going to blow smoke onto my neighbor's property and ruin his crops.
Okay. But should you be able to build a giant monolith or to like a giant swastika if it's just on your land? You think that's okay?
I guess. I don't know why somebody would want to do that, but
Because there's Nazis out there. There's a ton of them. They live in they're not that far from here.
okay.
I mean, your the
Anyway.
freedom has to be limited. There has to be limits. There has to be
Limits to
what
freedom
you
of
do.
expression? Limits to what people can say?
Yeah, because hate speech exists.
Okay.
You can't say whatever you want.
People say hateful things, that's true, but you want to limit their ability to say them.
I don't think that people should be able to put to. The problem is that without regulation, someone could build something absolutely ridiculous that is an eyesore that drives down the property values of everybody else.
Okay.
And that is what
That would be infringing on the rights of others. Yes.
And that's what. So you wanna update. So if you updating your kitchen creates a noise violation, and the kitchen is sticking out weird from the side of your house, and that makes your house look bad, which makes all the houses around that look bad. That's why there are limitations. That's why there are government limitations.
Well, usually the style of construction of a home is only a covenant of like a homeowners association or the builder of a subdivision.
But you want to get rid of that altogether. You say that everyone should be able to build whatever they want on their own personal property, however they want.
So if a builder is building a subdivision and he creates covenants for that subdivision, saying this is what all the houses have to look like, and somebody chooses to buy into that system, they say, okay, I want to live in that subdivision, and I want to live in that subdivision under the constraints of this covenant. When they make that choice, that's their choice. I'm fine with that.
So if you choose to move to Portland and you choose to buy a house, that's within that's the exact same thing.
Well, if those laws already existed, the issue is most of the people that lived in Portland, like your grandmother, for 50 years or 80 years, and then they imposed these new regulations on top of that so that she could no longer do things with her property that she'd owned, and they didn't grandfather in those restrictions. That's my problem, because she had invested, her time and her energy and her money into her property, and then the government comes along and says, okay, from now on, you can't do what you want to do unless you do what we tell you to do.
Because there's other people in the world.
Right.
And you can't be selfish. And you shouldn't be selfish. And the city is growing. And if you want to add, and if you want to change anything about your house, you can, but you have to increase the amount, you have to increase the living space. You need to build an apartment if you want to do anything.
So now you have a house, you have a single family house, you've lived there for 50 years, you want to remodel the kitchen, and in order to do that, now you have to let somebody else move onto your property.
No.
Yeah, if you build a garage apartment.
You don't have to rent it out. They never said you have to rent it out.
I see. So you're gonna have to spend all of that money to build a garage apartment that then you're not going to rent out. So instead of paying $10,000 to remodel your kitchen, now you have to spend $85,000 for $10,000 for your kitchen and $65,000 to build a garage apartment.
Yeah, and then when you sell the house, it will be you'll get way more profit.
Well, the issue is nobody's going to, unless they're about to sell their house anyway, they wouldn't do that.
And most people don't make home improvements until they're about to sell their house.
That's not true.
A majority of people do home improvements when they're trying to get rid of their house. They're not constantly improving their homes.
That's not true. I mean,
massive construction and redoing kitchens is either done at the beginning when you first buy your house or when you're about to sell it. You don't do that in the middle.
Your grandmother and your aunt lived in that house on 50th for what, 40 years?
Yeah.
They probably remodeled something in that house 4 or 5 times during that time.
Yes, and the entire every time they tried to the reason why they were remodeling it was because they always said that they were going to sell it. That's why they kept remodeling it. They just got lazy. and didn't want to clean the shit out. That they'd been saying they were going to sell the house for 30 years.
That may have been the excuse they used with each other, but every time they had enough equity built up in their home loan to take out some equity and spend it on the house, they did something. They took out money and redid a bathroom, or they took out money and they redid the kitchen, or they took out money and they put in a pool, or whatever they did. And that wasn't because they were planning to sell the house. That's because they wanted to improve their living conditions. And to your point, I mean, I'm not saying you're not wrong. I'm not saying you're not right, because when you say most people, maybe more than 50% of the people that do major renovations on their home are doing it to prepare it for sale. But my point is, the government, it doesn't seem right that the government can come along and essentially change the rules of the game on you if you've been living somewhere for decades, and your house is paid off maybe, and all of a sudden you aren't allowed to make changes to your own house without doing something that you don't want to do. If I don't want to add a garage apartment to my home in order to remodel my kitchen, it does not seem fair and just that the government should be able to come in and make that imposition. That doesn't sound like freedom. That doesn't sound like the United States of America.
The United States of America has never been free. This idea of freedom has never really existed. The United States of America was founded by white men and built on the backs of slaves. We've never been free. This whole freedom thing is just marketing, and it's been from day one. It's like leave England, come to America. That's why they left. The Pilgrims left, and then the people who were here started imposing restrictions on everybody. That's what you did. That's what they did from day one. Women couldn't vote. Women didn't have a say. African Americans were only 3/5 of a person. America has never been free, and this land itself was stolen from the Native Americans. There's no such thing as free. Nothing is free. There's no such thing as freedom.
Nothing is free. Okay, that's a good point. So let's talk about free healthcare and free college.
Uh-huh.
You just said nothing's free. So
it isn't.
Who pays for it?
The taxpayer.
Okay. So it's not free healthcare. It's not free college. It's taxpayer supplied healthcare.
Yes, instead of taxpayer supplied brutality, which is what we are doing with the military industrial complex. I'm saying we need to just shift the funds from the military, which we don't need, to taking care of the people.
Are you sure you're not a Russian bot?
What do you mean?
Well, don't you think it would benefit Russia and China for us to not have a military?
We have nukes.
Okay.
If Russia and China wants to fuck with us, we can press a button and they will be wiped out.
Well, so will we. That's the issue.
Yes.
Your only choice is to end the world.
Yes.
And in game theory, you wouldn't do that. Most people who have to make that decision would say, okay, well, it's better to be a subject of Russian or Chinese rule than to destroy the planet.
The amount of money that we spend on the military is astronomical, and it doesn't even make sense.
I agree. We agree on that.
And if we shifted that money to taking care of the American people, then our lives would be, everyone would be happier and our lives would be better.
I agree too. So why didn't the Democratic Party nominate Tulsi Gabbard, who was saying exactly that?
Because everything is corrupt, man. It's all a game. No one really knows who's controlling everything. There's the rich elite that are controlling everything. And it's going to stay that way for probably a long time until they're gone.
Okay. Well, I mean, historically, if you want to go back tens of thousands of years through all of recorded history and every civilization that's ever existed, the rich elite control everything.
Yes.
Okay. What the system... Okay, I just looked at the clock. So I don't think we have time to start another discussion about the political system. So we'll save that for another episode, because that's where the conversation has taken us. In our first In our first discussion, we talked about racism in episode 1. Episode 2 was media sources.
Oh yeah. Okay. We started this talking about the homeless problem,
Yes. And
and
to,
the way that I think that we fix the homeless problem is that we reopen the mental institutions. We don't force people in there, but we have them available, and we have health services available for the people that can't afford them.
right.
And that's what needs, and that will curb the homeless population. And there needs to be more drug clinics to help people who are addicted. But and just assuming that someone is on the street because they are a drug addict is I feel like a majority of the people who are on the streets who are addicts because they're on the street. They weren't on the street because they're addicts. It's the other way around. They became homeless and they didn't have anything to do and they didn't know what to do. So they turned to drugs.
Okay.
Because it was there and it was available. When services are there and available, they won't turn to drugs. They'll turn to those services. There needs to be a place where someone who is homeless and is distraught can go and shower and get career training and can become and go through counseling and can become a contributing member of society again. That's what we need to. Those are the kinds of things that needs to be established.
Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, that's what the prison system is. People end up in jail because they don't have anywhere else to go.
And the prison system is a for-profit system, and that's really messed up.
Yes, it is.
And that needs to change.
Right.
And the laws need to change. And the people who enforce the laws need to change.
When you say the laws need to change, what do you mean?
It might not necessarily be the laws, but it needs to be the enforcement or the judges, because if a white man and a black man are both pulled over and they both have drugs on them, the white guy's gonna get off and the black guy's gonna go to jail. I'm an example of that.
I know, but I don't know that that's.
I was pulled over and
evidence.
I got out of it. I had weed on me, and I got 6. And the cop that pulled me over said, you know, you could go to jail for like a year for this, but I got 40 hours community service and 6 months probation, and I don't even know what the probation meant because I never had to check in with anybody or do anything.
Right.
Like. If I was an African American and the exact same situation happened, I would have been in jail. They would have kept me in jail. I was in jail for like 20 minutes. They took my picture and they're like, "Okay, you can go."
Okay. Well, I mean,
and I was in one of the state. I was in Missouri where weed is like the most illegal, and they would, but they let me go because I was a young white dude.
Okay.
And that's the shit that needs to change. It's just...
You should have gone to jail too.
No.
Oh.
No.
What do you mean? Nobody should go to jail for weed?
Nobody should go to jail for weed. No one should go to jail for drugs, period.
Okay.
If you were taking drugs, it is because it is an escape. No one should be able... You want to talk about government deregulations, the government should not be able to tell you what you do with your own body.
100% agree.
That's what needs to change. Drugs. The people who can, I can understand trying to regulate the production of drugs, because you don't want kids taking drugs and you don't want them rampant. But you should be able to experiment and do whatever you want with your own life and your own body, as long as it doesn't impact anybody. What they need to do is they need to increase the what happens if you are on drugs and you harm somebody else. That's what you need to be jailed for.
Right. I mean, DUI.
Yeah. I'm okay with that.
There's no reason why cannabis and whatever else should be regulated any differently than alcohol is regulated.
Correct. Yes. I 100% agree.
And then that would solve a lot of the prison problems.
Yes, it would.
Take everybody
and
out.
and it would stop people from becoming career criminals. Because if a lot of people they get the kids go in young and then they come out like 5 or 10 years later and all they know is violence and hatred, and so then they harm other people, or they try to steal, and then they go back to jail, and it's just that it's you know it's really hard to get out of that once, especially if you were put in there at a young age, which a lot of these people are. They're put in when they're teenagers.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And a lot of the homeless people are ex-cons too. That's another that loop back to that. They can't get jobs because they're ex-cons because they were in jail for 20 years.
And I think something like, I don't know what, at this point, 75 to 80% of the population of the United States thinks cannabis should be legalized.
Yes, it should be, or decriminalized.
Whatever. So I wonder why, if it's such a big majority of people, why one of the presidential candidates doesn't just say, okay, we're going to, if I get elected, we're going to legalize cannabis or decriminalize it.
Because they will be automatically vilified by the right.
Well, then Joe Biden should do it. He's already vilified by the right.
No, he's not. The reason why Joe Biden is running for president is because he can pull in the moderates. That's why they have Joe Biden, is to get the right. The far right are not going to vote for Biden, but the intelligent, the people who aren't trumpeters but are still Republicans, that's why they chose Biden, because he's a middle of the road person. And for some reason cannabis is an extreme issue. They link cannabis with the extreme left.
Okay.
The extreme right does, I'm saying. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that there's not Republicans or right-wing people who smoke weed. I know there's a ton of them because everyone smokes weed. but publicly, they have to vilify it.
No, but if 78% of the population, according to polls, agrees that cannabis should be decriminalized, that only leaves 22% of the population who thinks it should remain illegal.
Yes.
Okay, so
but the 22% are the ones that are controlling the narrative.
And you think they're on the far right?
Yes. I don't think anyone who's liberal is anti-weed.
Okay, right. So I still don't understand why Joe Biden wouldn't come out and say we're going to decriminalize marijuana if he wants to win the election.
Because the right will vilify him.
Who cares? It's 22%.
But it's not 22%. It's the entire right wing would the attack ads. He's a moderate. He's a moderate.
Okay.
And it is a extreme leftist issue.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean,
in the narrative it is. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying that in the narrative that they're spinning it
okay,
is.
so the reason he doesn't promise to decriminalize marijuana is because he believes the narrative?
Yeah.
That he knows is false?
Yes.
He believes the narrative he knows is false.
Yes.
That sounds like somebody who's senile. How do you believe a narrative you
Why
know
didn't
is
Obama George Bush snorted coke all the time, and he smoked weed when he was in college, and Obama smoked weed. Why didn't Obama do it?
Yeah. Why didn't he?
It's because of the narrative. It's because of the fact that they would vilify him. It's because you don't think that if Joe Biden
you know why?
Why?
Because the pharmaceutical companies don't want it legalized, and they control. They're the people who make the political contributions that keeps these people in line.
That's probably true.
There's no other explanation. If 78% of the population thinks cannabis should be decriminalized, the only explanation for either one of the candidates not promising to decriminalize marijuana and cannabis is that the donors who pay for all their political ads are the big pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
Okay. So it has nothing to do with Joe Biden not believing the narrative. It's that Joe Biden wants money from Big Pharma.
Big Pharma controls the narrative, though. That's what I'm saying. The rich people on top are the ones that are controlling the narrative and are telling the networks what to say.
Okay. And they want to maintain the prison populations.
Yes. because that's a cash cow.
Okay, so the people who are supporting Joe Biden should be demanding that he promise to decriminalize marijuana.
Why? It's just going to lose him votes.
No, it's not.
Yes, it will.
70. So you disagree that 78% of the population think cannabis should be decriminalized?
No, I agree with that. I agree with that, but
And
I
it
think
isn't going to lose him votes. It's going to gain
when
him
there
votes.
is when there is an old lady in Alabama who has been a Republican her whole life, but doesn't like Trump because he said he wanted that to grab women by the Yahoo or whatever, and she goes into the voting booth. If she thinks that Joe Biden is going to decriminalize marijuana, even though she was gonna vote for him, if she in that moment she's like, well, I really don't like Trump, but I don't want a bunch of weed heads running around Alabama. She's gonna vote for Trump. That's why. That's the narrative.
Okay, well, think about that scenario. You talked about Alabama. What chance does Joe Biden have of winning Alabama at all?
Virginia, Texas, you can
Okay.
replace that. The state doesn't matter.
It doesn't
even,
matter.
Even here.
It does matter in the calculation of are you going to gain or lose more votes by promising to decriminalize cannabis?
And he would probably lose more votes. That's what I'm saying.
But how would he lose more votes if 78% of the population wants cannabis decriminalized? That doesn't make any sense.
Because it's linked to a leftist. It's a leftist.
He is
issue.
the leftist candidate.
He's the moderate candidate. Bernie was the leftist candidate. Bernie could have come out and said, "We're going to decriminalize weed," and everyone would be like, "Okay." But Bernie isn't the one who's running.
So you think
It's
so basically what you're saying is Joe Biden has all the Bernie supporters in his back pocket, and now he's trying to go get the
Trumpers.
John Kasich Republicans.
Yes.
And you think there's no consequences on the left of him appealing to the Republicans. You think Bernie supporters want to vote for in everything.
No, we don't want to vote for him in the first place. We don't want to vote for him.
So don't you think?
But we have to.
No, you don't.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Because anything to get Trump out.
Well, that's the bet, I guess.
It has to be.
It doesn't look like it's working.
You don't know.
I'm just going on the latest polls. I mean, we'll see.
What are the latest polls that have
Trump ahead?
No, there's no polls that have Trump ahead.
Yeah, there are.
No, there aren't. That's crazy.
Sorry.
He's killing people. 150,000 Americans have died because of Trump.
No, that's because of COVID.
Yeah, because of Trump.
Okay.
If Trump had come out
You
day
know what
one and said, wear a mask, don't be an idiot,
You know
instead of, you don't have to wear a mask, it's just going to disappear, 100,000 people wouldn't have died. Trump is a murderer, and he's a rapist.
Okay. Do you know what the original projections for COVID death was in the United States? The original projections?
What?
2 million.
Okay.
We're at 150,000.
Yeah, and those 150,000 did not have to die. And they died because Trump came out and said, you don't have to wear a mask, don't worry about it. It's just going to disappear.
There are people that followed all the protocols and still died. Masks aren't necessarily going to save people. Anyway, the science on COVID will come out eventually. But, you know, they said 2 million people were going to die. Trump shut down travel to China. Trump shut down travel from Europe. We ended up with 150,000 dead. Now,
That's 150,000 too many.
Sure, Chancellor, but you know the flu, 243,000.
That's still 150,000 too
Sure.
many. Every human life
204
matters. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, then you're going to have to shut down a lot of other stuff too, because 243,000 people a month die in the United States.
Okay.
Traffic fatalities, drug overdoses, suicides. There's all kinds of things. Old age.
If you can do something to prevent people from dying, you should do it. Just because
Yes.
people die.
Okay, there
anyway.
is something we can prevent from people. We can outlaw all cigarettes. No cigarettes are no longer allowed. We can outlaw all alcohol. You can't buy a drink anymore. We can take cars off the road. Nobody can drive a car. There's lots of things we can do to prevent anybody from dying.
No, outlawing cigarettes and cars and alcohol are personal choices. This is a disease that you do not choose to get. You choose to smoke cigarettes. You choose to drink alcohol. You do not choose to catch a random disease because you go to the grocery store. You may have chose to go to the grocery store because you had to get food, but if that person who had that disease wore a mask, it would prevent me from getting it.
Possibly. Like I said, the science is still out. I mean, there's cases where people followed all of the protocols and wore masks and they still died. So that's
Doctors, you mean?
no, there was
Nurses,
there
the
was
people who were taking care of other people?
no some 65-year-old lady who was in the news the other day who, her survivors said they didn't understand how she could have died because she did everything right. She did everything the government told her to do. She put on the mask every time she went anywhere. She quarantined. So the science is still out. When the thing first came out, people were saying don't touch surfaces, and then now they changed the story on that, and they said it's only airborne.
It doesn't. Okay.
But that who knows? Maybe they'll come up with something else.
Instead of ignoring it, he should have faced it, and he didn't. He was just like, "Don't worry, it'll disappear." That is poor leadership.
Yeah,
that is poor leadership.
Yes.
He is a bad leader. And he has bankrupted all of his businesses, and he has raped a 13-year-old girl. He's a bad person, and he should not be running this country.
Allegedly. And, you have to be very careful when you say things like that because there's no proof of that, and you're not allowed.
There are thousands of pages of court documents.
No.
Yes, he paid off.
What is a court document?
He has paid off like 10 people. He's paid off all these girls. Okay. I don't have to be careful by saying Trump's a rapist because Trump is a rapist.
Yes, you do, because you can be held liable for that if it's not true. If
there are court documents proving it.
If those court documents do not prove anything. If somebody files a civil suit, they say this is what I'm suing you for. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it true. Just because somebody files suit and it says I'm going to sue you because you did X, Y, and Z. It's still
what about all the creepy ass pictures of him and his daughter, and him saying that if she wasn't his daughter, that he would do her. That's his own words that he said.
I never saw that, but if you have that and you have it well documented, then you are free to say that.
It's documented. It's out there. It's in an interview. He's like, what is her name? Ivanka, right? Mm-hmm. Ivanka's so beautiful. If she wasn't my daughter, oh my God, I would totally.
Okay, that's gross.
Yeah, no shit, because he's a disgusting human being.
Okay, well, there's lots of people who will agree with you on that point. But that does not make him a rapist. You can't say that.
No, the fact that he was Jeffrey Epstein's best friend and Maxine Gladwell's best friend, and they ran a giant pedophile ring, that's what makes him a rapist.
No proof of that. There's no proof of that, and you're
so you don't even think Epstein Island is a thing?
Yes, I think it was. I've seen pictures of it.
Okay,
and there's lots of documentation and testimony.
Okay,
and Epstein was convicted of that. That's why he was in jail.
And Trump was his buddy, and he was on his plane a ton, and he went to the island a ton.
I haven't seen that evidence. I have not seen that. I have seen evidence of Bill Clinton on the plane and on the island, but I have not seen documentation of Trump visiting the island. I haven't seen it. Maybe it's there. I don't know.
It's definitely there.
Where? Where did you see it?
In some article when the list was published of all the people who were on the flight logs.
Well, being on the plane does not necessarily mean going to the island, because Epstein flew that plane around the world and took people in all different places on it.
Okay, so a known person who ran a child pedophile ring was best friends with the president.
No, not best friends.
There are hundreds of pictures of them together. They were friends.
Okay, well, there's a difference between friends, acquaintances, and best friends.
Hundreds of pictures, known each other for years, years.
But think about this.
So
Epstein was in New York society. So there's thousands of people that have hundreds of pictures with Epstein because he was in those New York
because he ran the pedophile ring for the rich and the famous.
Okay.
Why would Trump even know him in the first place if he wasn't involved in that?
Because they went to the same cocktail parties.
Oh my God, dude. The cocktail parties where they probably selected the children. Like, you gotta
No. What do you mean?
Oh my God. I just don't understand why you assume Trump is a good guy when
I
obviously over the years
No,
he has proven time and time again to be one of the worst human beings to ever exist on this planet.
My only assumption is innocent until proven guilty. That's my only assumption. Innocent until proven guilty. And if Trump
Or guilty until buying your way into innocence.
No, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Everything that you're advocating for might one day come back to bite you. That's all I'm saying. You're going to be rich and famous someday, and you're going to have a bunch of people accusing you of doing things so they can extort money from you. And you can either take them to court. It doesn't matter that you're not a. That's the whole point, Chancellor. You're not a bad person. But once you get super famous and super rich, you become a target for people who want to extort money from you by accusing you of things you didn't do. That's the reality of the situation. And you can either take them to court and fight it and spend millions of dollars to prove your own innocence.
Which I'll do.
Okay, good. That's a good choice.
Because I don't need anybody questioning it.
Okay.
Which, unlike Trump, who just paid him off.
Well, if somebody decides,
and it's not like he didn't have the money. It's not like he didn't have the money to fight them. That's the thing. He was just like, no. Let's just pay these girls off. I did it. Let's just pay them off.
No, he didn't say I did it. All he said was it's cheaper to just give them some money to make them go away than to spend millions of dollars fighting this in court, where it will get publicized and might do even greater damage.
That's the Harvey Weinstein viewpoint too.
Okay, what do you mean by the Harvey Weinstein viewpoint?
When people were suing, when girls came up tried to accuse Harvey Weinstein for years, he just constantly paid them off.
Okay, well,
and Harvey Weinstein was convicted. Here's the thing. It's not an isolated incident with these people. If it was isolated incidents, then I could say, okay, maybe this person is just trying to extort him. But it kept happening over and over and over and over and over again. And Trump said, grab him by the pussy. Right there is your fucking proof. You want proof? He said that. He said that. I don't care. I just love him. I just grab him. I just kiss him. You can grab him by the pussy. You can do whatever you want. That's his own words. He believes that.
Describing who?
Describing women in general.
No, it wasn't women in general. As from what I recall during that conversation,
it's a single woman, it's not okay.
Okay. As I recall during that conversation, he was talking about being famous and how girls threw themselves at you when you're famous, like rock star groupies.
Okay.
So just to be clear, what he was saying was, when you're rich and famous, women throw themselves at you.
That's not the same as you can just grab them by the pussy.
He was demonstrating.
No. That's not the same.
What?
Having women approach you because you are at a certain status is not the same as saying that you can just grab them and kiss. Yeah, and he also said, I can just grab them and kiss them. That's rape. That's rape.
Okay. There's a whole nother conversation to have there that we've almost had a few times where we talk about consent, right?
Yes.
What constitutes consent? So if you're a Aerosmith groupie and you throw on, high heels and shorts and a tank top and fishnet stockings and whatever.
Because it makes you feel good and you look good in them.
And you run backstage and you say, we want to go backstage and we want to go in the dressing room with it. So are you essentially consenting to have sexual relations with the rock band by doing that?
No.
Okay. Great.
You're not.
Okay. Well, then you need to...
I go to raves.
Then you need
girls on raves dress in basically nothing. And that does not mean that people can just grab them.
No,
that does not mean that they are opening themselves up to be fondled. It just means that they feel good in those outfits and they want to show them off. Just because they want to show their bodies off does not give you the right to take advantage of that situation and to try to harm them.
Right. Okay. I'm just saying in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when these rock bands were touring the country and girls would go backstage, and it was common knowledge that when you went backstage that you were going to have sex with the rock group, and that's why you were doing it.
Or you were doing it because you wanted to meet a rock star?
Okay.
That's
Right.
not the same, man. It's not the same. It's not the same at all.
As what? What do you mean? I'm just saying if the culturally accepted behavior and norms and understanding is that if you're
What's
running
a norm and an understanding?
that if you're a groupie, if you're
Uh-huh.
calling yourself a groupie and you're running backstage after the concert or before the concert for that matter to get with one of these rock stars, then it's
So you think that the second that girl walks into the rock star's locker room, the rock star's room, he can just walk up to her, shove her against the wall, and rape her? Because that's what you're saying. You're saying because she was wearing fishnets and she wanted to go backstage that that she's just asking for it, and that's the problem.
okay.
They're not asking for it
Okay. Well,
unless they actually go up and ask for it. And say,
somebody should communicate very clearly to all of those rock stars that that these girls that are coming back there aren't asking for it. Because my guess is if that became common knowledge, then the rock stars would start saying, well, we're just not going to have girls come back here anymore.
they don't really anymore. They haven't in like the last 10 years.
Okay.
That's
well, good. That's great for
everybody.
society. Well, it's not great for the girls that wanted to go backstage and have sex with the rock stars. It's not great for them. You're
Okay.
denying them
I'm denying them rock star sex.
Yes.
Yeah, and if they wanted to really have sex with the rock star, then they would write them letters or they would message them on Instagram and they would build a relationship and a rapport with them instead of just being a piece of meat.
Right.
You're advocating for rock stars to treat women like pieces of meat. You're advocating for Trump to treat women like a piece of meat.
I'm advocating for women who want to be treated like that to be able to be treated.
You think
that.
women want to be disrespected and want to be treated like trash?
I don't know. They were doing it for decades.
No, they weren't. They just wanted to meet the rock stars, man.
Oh, okay. You're thinking those women that went back and had sex with the rock stars didn't want.
I have a huge thing for Katy Perry. If I went to a Katy Perry concert and I got the chance to go backstage and meet Katy Perry, and the second I walked in, Katy Perry shoved me up against the wall and started licking my neck, I would instantly be repulsed. Even though I still want to have sex with Katy Perry, I still want and that's just me giving an example. It's not okay.
I think if Katy Perry threw you up against the wall in her dressing room and started licking you on the neck, something would happen instantly, but it probably wouldn't be you being repulsed.
People just need to be treated with respect, man.
Yes.
And Trump does not respect anybody except for himself.
Could be. I don't know. I've never met the man.
All you have to do is listen to 5 minutes of him talking. He's a walking ego. He does not care about anybody except for himself and his bottom line. He never has. He never has. When he was trying to get African American people evicted from the buildings in New York, ever since the 80s, he has been a terrible person. He is evil. And he needs to be taken down. And even if that means that we have to put in Biden has gone after my community and my raves for as long as he's been a politician. He's been anti-rave, okay? I do not like Biden, but anything to take Trump down, anything, by any means necessary, he needs to be removed from office.
Okay. And this comes from the information that you've been exposed to through your sources, which is what we talked about.
No, this comes from his own words, from listening to him as a person. The second he said you could just grab him by the pussy, I was done.
Okay. Because that particular comment got caught on tape.
And he's probably made millions and millions of worse comments than that.
Right. And there's some evidence that Joe Biden has sexually accosted women as well. Tara Reid recounts what he did to her when she was his intern. So I'm just saying the coverage may be leading you to believe that one of the candidates offered by the major parties is somehow better than the other. But that has a lot to do with the way that the media has structured the narrative than necessarily the truth. If
The
you
truth I'm getting about Trump is
Okay,
from his own
here's
words,
what
man.
I'm saying. If you went and you spent 3 hours with Donald Trump in person,
Yes.
and then you
If
went,
I could stomach 3 hours with Donald Trump, you mean?
and then you went and spent 3 hours in person with Joe Biden,
Yes.
you might come to the same conclusions. You might come to a different conclusion.
No, I know I would come to the same conclusion.
How do you know that?
Because Donald Trump repulses me on every cell of my
But
body
you've
is
never
repulsed
been
by
with
him.
Donald Trump. The only thing that you have experienced is
His own
the-
words.
the picture,
and watching him on The
pic-
Apprentice.
the
And watching him. I've been watching this douchebag for most of my life. Since Home Alone, I've seen this guy.
You've acted in reality TV shows.
Yes.
They're scripted, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you are saying that because of the way he performed his role on the show, the scripted show, The Apprentice, you are associating that with him in real life.
And also the documentaries that I've watched on him.
Okay, but people can craft a narrative around someone.
Yes, but the actions that he's
particularly-
taken, the actions. It's not about the narrative. It's about the actions. It's about the fact that he bankrupted his businesses. That's not a narrative.
Correct,
Him saying things, the actual words that come out of his mouth that is not regulated. His Twitter is not regulated.
Okay.
That is him. That is him. And I hate him. I am
Okay.
repulsed by him. Everything about him, I am repulsed by.
Okay.
Him,
Then
the person, not the narrative, not whatever the media has spun, because he controls his Twitter. He controls what he says. When he goes to those rallies, he doesn't have a script. He just goes off of whatever the fuck pops into his puny brain of his.
Okay.
And that's why I hate him.
Okay. Or you really hate him, or you just don't want to vote for him?
I hate him. I don't. He's probably the only human being on the planet that I genuinely hate.
Interesting. Considering the number of innocent people in other countries that prior presidents have essentially murdered in war crimes, it's interesting that you reserve your hate for him.
So his entire picture is bad.
Well, I understand that. But what I'm saying is,
If everything that he has done to benefit himself and and he is the most selfish human being on the planet, that is why I hate him. Because he does not care about anybody else. He just wants to get as much money as he possibly can, so he funnels all of his money through the government. He uses he's using Mar-a-Lago. He's just constantly giving himself more money by being the president. And then he says all that shit about women on top of that. And then just the racist rhetoric that he promotes is like everything about him is why I hate him. It's not just one isolated incident. Yes, President Obama wiped out people with drones. Clinton did bad shit. I'm not saying that they were perfect, but they weren't evil. And every cell of his body is evil because he is driven by ego alone.
So it's interesting that is the perception of this one particular representation of the millennials in the United States based on the information that they've been fed over the last
Not
4
fed.
years.
It's me witnessing it. It's me witnessing the shit that's coming out of his mouth and the stuff that he says on Twitter. That is him. That is not what I'm being fed. That is him. It's not about being fed something. It's him choosing to be a racist, bigot, asshole.
What's the racist thing he said?
That there are good people on both sides.
And we talked about that before.
Yes. And you were wrong.
No, I wasn't.
Because there aren't good people on both sides.
Yeah.
No.
There was 3 groups there. We all agree that the neo-Nazis were horrible, and he denounced the neo-Nazis 30 seconds before he was talking about the people that were for keeping the statues up and the people that were for taking the statues down.
The statues needed to come down.
the statues of Ulysses S. Grant, Frederick Douglass, Teddy Roosevelt.
No, Robert E. Lee and
So
all of the Confederate generals need to be taken down. Columbus needs to be taken down.
so you're allowed to have your opinion, but you don't get to dictate what somebody in their community wants to have in their community. If somebody lives in a city
And
they want
if that city is entirely racist and that city wants to fly a Confederate flag, you think that's okay?
if the city votes to keep a statue, then some moral police person shouldn't be able to come in there and take it down, violently remove some piece of public property against the will of the majority of the people who live there.
So if I get everybody in a small town to build a statue that just says "fuck Trump, that racist, rapist piece of shit," and we all vote, you think that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
If everybody votes to put up a statue and you erect it, based on your community, yeah, you should be able to do that.
Okay.
Why wouldn't you? Why shouldn't you be able to do that?
Because there are people who are going to have to drive by that statue.
They can move.
Oh, people can move? People can move.
People
right?
should
people should be able to move.
People should have the freedom to move into a community that they want to live in based on how good the schools are.
Okay, so all the companies in the United States should be able to move and leave America, and then we won't have any jobs.
Yeah. They can. What do you mean? That's the point. That's the beginning of this conversation, or last week's conversation. Yeah, you have the way to keep companies in your economy is to provide the incentive structure for them to be here. You can't force companies to do business in your economy. You can't force them. You have to incent them.
By giving them tax loopholes that make them not have to pay anything.
Okay.
So that the people, the lower class people.
It doesn't have anything to do with the lower class people.
It does. Everything does. That's what you don't understand. We
Amazon,
should be looking out for the people who are at the bottom, not the ones that are on top.
You don't use your business development program to directly provide social programs. My point is, the people in the Bronx, New York would have been much better off with the 25,000 jobs that the Amazon the distribution center was going to provide. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Not necessarily.
Bronx wanted to offer Amazon an economic incentive to move their headquarters there and employ 25,000 people. AOC rose a stink about the economic incentive tax break to lure Amazon into their city. And so they didn't move there. And 25,000 people who would otherwise have had a job didn't have a job.
A shitty job with low pay where they were basically treated like robots. I know people who work in the Amazon fulfillment center.
Okay.
They are treated like robots.
Well, I think this was going to be a second Amazon headquarters. So this was not just warehouse jobs.
Okay, so it's the rich people that she was gonna let come in. The rich people were gonna come in. They were all gonna get high paying jobs, and they were gonna kick out all the poor people because all the rents would be raised because there was a brand new Amazon headquarters there. So the rent is raised. So all the buildings, all the landlords could raise the rent because there's all these higher paying jobs in this area. So all the lower paying people would get kicked out. That's probably why AOC was pissed off.
Okay. So better to have them unemployed and on the government dole than working at Amazon?
Better to have them being treated like human beings and being treated like robots. In effect, yes.
What do you mean by treated like
you
human beings?
You said that it was a headquarters that was going to come in. All the people that lived in that neighborhood would not have gotten a job there if it was a headquarter that was coming in. Okay. They would be forced to move out of their house. They would be forced to be moved to a worse part of town because they would not be able to afford their rent, or they would become homeless.
What if the Bronx was already the worst part of town? What if they were moving? What if they were the people there who decided to offer the economic incentive to lure Amazon there was doing it to try and improve the quality of life in
they-
the worst part of town.
But they wouldn't.
How so?
Because the Amazon, you said it was a headquarters, not a fulfillment center.
Okay.
So if it was a headquarters, then all those people would not be able to get a job there.
Right. But if 25,000 people, rich people, moved into the area or came to work there or worked remotely or whatever, and it increased the values of the property and increased the amount of money that was circulating in the local economy, then what if those 25,000 people, I mean, if those people that were there now weren't getting necessarily a job at Amazon, they could be getting jobs at all of the businesses that sprung up to serve those people.
But they wouldn't be able to live there. They would have to commute there because they wouldn't be able to afford.
Okay, so your argument,
their rent.
Your argument now is to keep everybody at their current level.
No.
Well, what are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying. If they're living in the Bronx now,
and they're happy. If they're happy.
Well, if they were happy,
keep people at their current level. If they're happy at their current level, and if they want to climb, then there should be education available for them to climb. Like community college should be free.
Okay. I'm still trying to figure out what you want to do with the Bronx. If they have a high unemployment and they have low property values because people don't have jobs and there's not enough money for those people to improve the quality of their life, and you have an opportunity to bring in some kind of employment, you're just saying
some kind of employment isn't Amazon.
Amazon is some kind of employment.
Not
they said it was 25,000 jobs. Why?
Because you said it wasn't a fulfillment center.
Right, 25,000 jobs, yeah.
You said it was their headquarters.
Okay.
So none of the people that are currently living there would be able to get a job there.
How do you know that?
Because you're the one who said it was a headquarters.
Yes, it's a headquarters. Headquarters have secretaries. Headquarters have janitors. Headquarters have assistant managers. Headquarters have mail people. Headquarters have all kinds of jobs from the executive vice president down through the intern in the mailroom. There's all kinds of jobs in a big headquarters. 25,000 jobs. When a company is going to have 25,000 jobs, that's not all 25,000 VP jobs. That's 4 VP jobs.
Okay.
And so, yeah, jobs that people in the Bronx could have got that they can't now.
Okay.
So you can either argue for economic development and improvement or against it. Those are the two alternatives. And you're saying because
I'm saying there's a reason why AOC said she didn't want it there, and there had to be a reason.
Yeah, well, the reason she gave was she didn't think that they should be offering tax breaks to Amazon.
They shouldn't.
Okay, and the consequence of that is Amazon.
So because Amazon wanted to be a dick and didn't want to provide 25,000 jobs because they weren't going to get a little more frosting on their cake.
Yeah.
Because they're dicks.
Because they have a fiduciary responsibility to
the other dicks.
To the shareholders.
That's the problem. That is the problem. It's not all about making money, man. You have to save your soul.
Okay. The issue is that when people make economic and political decisions based on saving their souls and some ideology or theology, instead of simple mathematic economic incentives, you end up with Stalin's Russia and Mao Zedong's China and people.
What about Switzerland?
The rich people.
What about Switzerland and the Netherlands?
What about them?
What about them? What do you mean? They're super happy, and everyone makes a ton of money.
Switzerland, yes.
Sweden. I mean, I was talking about Sweden.
Okay, well, Sweden has swung back towards capitalism. They're getting rid of their socialist programs because they were going bankrupt.
They're not getting rid of their socialist programs.
They are scaling back. their socialist programs because the country was going bankrupt. Sweden made a lot of money with North Sea oil. They decided to use a lot of that money for social programs. They implemented a lot of social programs. When the price of oil fell, the government revenues went down, the company was approaching bankruptcy. They started to get rid of those social programs.
Like what social programs did they
Just
get rid
the
of?
regulations and the
So regulations aren't getting rid of social programs. That's deregulating.
yeah.
You said they were getting rid of their social
lowering the
programs.
tax rates on business, lowering the amount of assistance, public assistance.
They've lowered their public assistance?
They scaled these things back. Yes.
I don't necessarily believe that.
Okay. Well, I heard a guy from the government of Sweden talking about it on a podcast the other day. So I'm gonna go with him over you. Check it out if you don't believe me. I'm just saying the countries that rule based on emotion and this kind of theology that everybody that makes money is evil.
I'm not saying
they end up killing 60 million people.
no.
Yes, they. How many people died in Mao Zedong under Mao Zedong in China? 60 million. 10 times worse than Hitler, but nobody talks about it.
What happened there then?
They killed everybody.
Why? How?
Because they didn't agree with the communist theocracy. People thought communism was the thing, and that anybody that had
Communism and
they
socialism
killed
aren't
people.
the same.
You know what? They killed people.
Communism and socialism aren't the same.
Okay, they killed people who wore glasses because they thought they were intelligent.
Okay, that's not the same thing. You're that providing healthcare for providing healthcare
I'm not
and
talking about
services
that.
for
What I'm talking about is your emotional outbreaks about people being dicks and people being selfish and people being evil because they make money.
No, it's not about making money. It's about making money by screwing people over.
And you define screwing people over as by making the biggest profit they can make.
Yes, instead of slightly smaller than that to help the world.
And
I'm not
those
saying
are not,
that-
those
I'm
are
not
not mutually exclusive. Somebody can make the most money they can make and then go help the world. Look what
So you saying you can make them? Let's build an apartment building. Let's make every apartment super duper cheap and crappy, and let's constantly raise the rent on that. That's okay because I'm gonna contribute $100 a month to a starving child in Ethiopia. That's what you're saying. You're saying that you can screw over a ton of people just as long as you have one little thing that you throw money at. That's what you're advocating.
What I'm advocating is operating within an economy, doing everything that's legal to make the most money you can make. If it's legal to build a building and put in crappy appliances and spend as little money as you can and charge as much for rent as you can.
You think that's okay?
Yeah, because that's
It's not okay. Do you have no morals?
It's not a moral question.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
It's not.
You should not actively try to harm people.
They're not actively trying to harm
Yes, they are by
people.
building shitty apartments.
If the shitty apartments are up to code, if that's the code of the city that they're building the building in, then those are safe apartments. Otherwise, the code needs to be changed.
The code needs to be changed. The code needs to be changed. Big time.
What's wrong with the building code?
A lot of the time, it allows for you to cut corners.
That's the whole point.
Trump Tower. Did you not see the documentary on Trump where he kept telling his builder to do all the lady builder to cut all these corners because he didn't care. He's like, we can charge so much money. We don't need the nice stuff. You could cut corners. I don't care if these things fall apart in a week. Like that, and that's okay to you?
If it works in the economic system and it's not illegal. My point is that
if murder wasn't illegal, would you be okay with that then? If rape wasn't illegal, would you be okay with that then? As long as it wasn't illegal?
Those aren't economic decisions. We're talking about
slavery is an economic decision. If slavery was legal, would you be okay with that?
No,
That's an economic decision.
no, it's not.
Yes, it is. If you want to build something cheap, you get slaves because you don't even have to pay them, right? That's an economic decision.
Well, up until
That's a no morals economic decision, which
And-
is what you're advocating for.
in the history of the world, up until the United States came along, that was the norm.
And you think that's okay.
No, and that's why it's gone now, because it wasn't okay.
And you're gonna and in 10 or 15 years, when the boomers are no longer in control and millennials are in control, you're gonna see that a lot of things are not okay. That are okay now. It's gonna change.
Okay, well, let's save, since we're at an hour and 40 minutes now,
Damn.
we can save how things are going to change under millennial rule for our next podcast.
Okay. That's good.
And we are going to share one of Chancellor's earlier works with you. This is Gone.
How you doing?
Closer.